What's a nsfw piece of history everyone has forgotten about? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. When then President of Indonesia Sukarno visited the Soviet Union, the KGB thought that it would be a good idea to send a honey trap. They hired 2 escorts to entertain him and recorded the acts using a spy camera. When blackmailed, President Sukarno laughed at the agents and asked them to send him the tapes so that he can watch it back home. Another interesting fact, John le Carre, the more famous pen name of the late David Cornwell, invented some slang to avoid using current terminology when writing his spy novels. Honey trap was his invention and has subsequently been adopted in the common lexicon. The practice of using witnesses to debauchery to unseat political authorities goes back to antiquity. Of course, faking those testimonies is just as well known, which explains some of the wilder crap that Suetonius and Dio published that wasn't in earlier accounts. Story 2. King Ferdinand I, or Ferrante, of Naples, kept a so-called Black Museum of the mummified remains of his personal and political enemies. He had them dressed and arranged in various scenes, and would often show off the museum to potential rivals, enemies he hadn't yet off. So yeah, pretty messed up. Look at this, folks, just incredible. No one has a museum like this, believe me. The best enemies, the strongest, all here. Some people, they say, Ferdinand, why do you keep them? I say, why not? But they were losers, big losers, and now they're part of history, my history. Nobody else could do this, nobody else could pull it off. And you know what? It sends a message, a very strong message. You cross me, this is where you end up. Everyone's talking about it. It's the greatest collection, folks. Tremendous. Story 3. A couple of NASA interns several years ago stole a huge number of moon rocks brought back during the Apollo missions, spread them out on a motel bed, and had intimacy on them, just so they could say they'd had intimacy on the moon. The 3 interns executed the heist by entering NASA using their IDs. They thought the code to the safe was written on a tag hanging on the safe. During the heist, they realized the code was a cryptic hint of the actual code, so they stole the entire safe. They used a power saw to open it and had intimacy on the rocks. After contaminating 101 grams of stolen moon rocks, they for some reason destroyed 30 years worth of research documents that was in the safe. Next, they found a dude in Belgium to buy them for $5,000 a gram. Dude said he'll do the transaction through his family in America. Instead, he contacted the FBI, and the interns was arrested. Thad Roberts was his name. He used the alias Orb Robinson. Story 4. James Joyce had quite the fart fetish and immortalized it in some very dirty letters to his wife Nora. I don't remember much at all of Ulysses from school, but God do I remember the letters. If I gave you a bigger, stronger mess than usual, fat, dirty farts sputtered out of your backside. You had an arse full of farts that night, darling, and I messed them out of you. Big fat fellows, long windy ones, quick little merry cracks, and a lot of tiny little naughty farties ending in a long gush from your hole. It is wonderful to mess a farting woman when every mess drives one out of her. I think I would know Nora's fart anywhere. I think I could pick hers out in a room full of farting women. It is a rather girlish noise, not like the wet, windy fart which I imagine fat wives have. It is sudden and dry and dirty, like what a bold girl would let off in fun in a school dormitory at night. I hope Nora will let off no end of her farts in my face so that I may know their smell also. Story 5. Andrew Jackson beat the brains out of multiple men while in office. His wife was also the blunt of many jokes that he either challenged or was challenged people to duels because of it. Allegedly, he was in around 100 duels. As far as I am aware, only once did he someone. Edit, so I did a little bit of research about it, and it turns out she was referred to as Fat Dumpling. There was also a theory that Andrew tried getting a divorce, but it never finalized, so nobody was sure on what was going on. He was also an adulterer, so they had a very estranged marriage. Story 6. Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, apparently lost her virginity on her mother's grave. She definitely said that she fell in love with Percy while they visited Wollstonecraft's grave. And she definitely lost her virginity to Percy, who was, by the way, very famously married to another woman he had ruined when she was a young teen and was forced to marry. But there's nothing in the source texts, letters, or diaries to suggest that it happened on Wollstonecraft's grave. There were a lot of rumors going around. He was a son about to inherit an estate, cheating on his very young and pregnant wife with the daughter of a famous fallen woman whose own husband had written an exposé about her, posthumously exposing her first daughter's bastard status as well as her second daughter's conception out of wedlock, and detailing the gruesome details of Mary Godwin's birth being the end of Wollstonecraft. The fact that the rumor mill made the connection between out-of-wedlock pregnancies and death with the gravesite is not at all a surprise. Story 7. The Newport Intimacy Scandal. The Navy heard that there was a common spot where enlisted and civilian men who have intimacy with men would go for hookups or relationships. To investigate, they sent enlisted personnel to gather intelligence, which resulted in them soliciting intimacy and participating in the same immoral acts that they were trying to criminalize. This led to embarrassment for the Navy, local clergy, many of whom had been discovered engaging in intimacy behavior during the investigation, and political fallout for those in charge of the investigation. Hey, we need to figure out if enlisted men are trying to have intimacy with each other at the Army and Navy YMCA. Got it. Well, let's send some enlisted men to the Army and Navy YMCA to try to have intimacy with other men, and we'll keep track of who goes for it. Story 8. The Radium Girls from the United States. Just read a book on them and it was horrific. The radium poisoning made their jawbones fall out with their teeth, not to mention all the sarcomas and the one girl who hemorrhaged and bled out because the poison ate through her jugular. They were told the radium was safe despite there being known health risks as early as 1901. There were still radium factories being operated as of 1978. When I read the book, I was so horrified that they told the women to put the brush with the radium in their mouths. A good example of horrible history. Story 9. Baby farmers. In Victorian, and previously one assumes unmarried mothers were of course looked down upon, and if you were in service and knocked up by the son of the owner, you were a bit messed as no one else would give a single mother a job. The solution? Baby farmers. Baby farmers were basically an industry to adopt, for a fee of course, these babies. Of course, some of these farmers realized that it was somewhat noisy and expensive, looking after a whole bunch of babies, and so they used a tonic called Godfrey's Cordial. Said tonic contained opium which knocked out the babies, and they were fed it by a few unscrupulous baby farmers until they starved to death. They then disposed of the baby, advertised again, and the cycle began again. For a particularly notorious example, look up Amelia Dyer or John and Sarah Macon. Story 10. They didn't start using anesthesia on babies until the late 1980s. It wasn't until 1987 that the American Academy of Pediatrics declared it unethical to operate on infants without the use of anesthesia. Mothers were doing everything to convince doctors that their babies could feel pain, but since the doctors said they would have no long-term memory at that point, then it wasn't as important. That's not very long ago. From Wiki, in the late 19th and first half of the 20th century citation needed, doctors were taught that babies did not experience pain and were treating their young patients accordingly. From needle sticks to tonsillectomies to heart operations were done with no anesthesia or analgesia, other than muscle relaxation for the surgery. Citation needed. The belief was that in babies the expression of pain was reflexive, and, owing to the immaturity of the infant brain, the pain could not really matter. Story 11. The claim that the Ku Klux Klan KKK lost its power in the 1920s specifically because a grand dragon bit a girl to death is not entirely accurate, but is a conflation of several historical events, particularly involving the downfall of a prominent KKK leader and the subsequent decline of the Klan's influence. Background: the Ku Klux Klan experienced a significant resurgence in the early 20th century, particularly in the 1920s, becoming a powerful and influential organization with millions of members across the United States. This iteration of the Klan was not only anti-black but also anti-Catholic, anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, and upheld a strict Protestant nationalism. Impact on the KKK: Stevenson's conviction had a profound impact on the Klan. The trial and the gruesome details of the crime shocked the public and discredited the KKK in the eyes of many Americans. The conviction exposed the corruption, hypocrisy, and violent nature of Klan leadership, leading to a significant decline in the organization's membership and political influence. While Stevenson's conviction was a major blow to the Klan, the organization's decline was also due to other factors, including internal divisions, public scandals, and growing public opposition. By the late 1920s, the Klan had lost much of its power and influence. though it would continue to exist in various forms throughout the 20th century and into the present day. Conclusion: the KKK's decline in the 1920s was not solely due to the actions of D.C. Stevenson, but his criminal acts and the subsequent trial were indeed significant factors that contributed to the erosion of the Klan's power and public standing during that period. Story 12. The reason informed consent is legally required in study participation, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. In 1932, a group of 600 impoverished black men were part of an experiment to observe untreated syphilis. 399 of these men had syphilis while the rest were used as a control group, all participating with the promise of free medical care. The men who had syphilis were never told they had it. Instead, they were gaslit and offered placebos to treat bad blood, while the researchers told local black doctors to deny them treatment. It was supposed to last 6 months. It lasted 40 years, and even though penicillin was used as an effective treatment 15 years after the start of the study, it was never offered to them. During World War II, 256 infected men were drafted and diagnosed by the military, unfit to serve without treatment. The researchers got them excluded from the draft to continue the experiment unbothered. It only stopped after news of the study was leaked to the press in 1972. 128 of the men had directly or indirectly from a completely treatable disease they were never told they had, and 59 relatives of the men contracted or were born with syphilis as a result. Story 13. In 1944, 9 American airmen were shot down over the Japanese island Chichijima in the Bonin Islands. 8 were captured by Japanese troops and were then beaten, tortured, and executed by beheading. Their remains were cannibalized by Japanese officers. The ritual cannibalism included eating the livers of freshly killed prisoners and eating living prisoners over several days, amputating limbs to keep the meat fresh. This case was investigated in 1947 in a war crimes trial. And of the 30 Japanese soldiers prosecuted, 4 officers were found guilty and hanged. All enlisted men were released within 8 years. Vice Admiral Mori Kunizo, commander of the Chichijima Air Base, believed hat consumption of human liver had medical benefits. He was initially sentenced to life imprisonment for his involvement in the incident, but was sentenced to death and hanged after a separate trial for other war crimes. The 9th airman who successfully evaded capture was eventually rescued. 45 years later, he was elected President of the United States. Story 14. After Martin Luther officially rejected Catholicism's requirement for celibacy among the clergy, he got married to a former nun. In those days, German tradition had it that the best man had to witness the consummation of the marriage that made it official. So his first intimacy encounter with his wife was witnessed in his bedchamber by his best man. Marriages could be cancelled after the wedding if the couple hadn't consummated the marriage with intimacy, but could not be annulled after consummation. So having someone witness the consummation was a sort of assurance that they made it official and final. Remember that in those days, the Catholic Church did not permit divorce. The nearest thing there was to divorce was annulment of unconsummated marriages. Edit. I missed several conditions that also permitted annulment, such as the marriage being found to be incestuous, and other conditions. See the comments replying to this. Annulment wasn't divorce, as much as it was a declaration that the marriage didn't count or wasn't valid in one way or another. King Henry VII of England was so upset that the Catholic Church wouldn't let him divorce that he split the Church of England from the Catholic Church in order to permit himself to get a divorce. Story 15. The reason women can be queen in Spain is due to King Fernando VII, who despite 4 or 5 marriages was only able to have 1 child, a girl. This is what they teach us in school. Turns out, the reason he had so much trouble having children is due to the size of his penis. It was absolutely ginormous. It was a foot in length, the tip as thick as a grown man's fist, and the base as thin as a pencil. One of his wives ran away during the wedding night when she saw it. Another literally pissed herself out of fear. He could not have intimacy without significantly injuring the woman. During his last marriage to someone, doctor I think, invented a cushion thingy that he could use to somehow get himself inside his wife without risking her life. Yada yada yada. He had 1 daughter and died soon after. Now we can have queens. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your those in the comment below.